You've come a long way so far. We've made 5 different paper piece blocks. We've put 4 of them into 4 different corners, and we're now ready to quilt our first section of the Quilt As You Go. Keep in mind that this is just a suggested way to quilt this segment. If you choose to do it another way, that's perfectly fine. We determined in our last tutorial that we needed to cut 28-inch square pieces of backing and batting. We also determined that we would have over 39 inches when we fold these 28-inch squares in half diagonally, and most of us don't have rulers that long to cut along that line. So here's my tip for you. After you have folded it along that diagonal line, place your rotary ruler at the very edge and snip off just a slight sliver, and that will cut it very easily for you. As for cutting the batting, I just take one of my backing pieces and lay it down on my batting and use that for my pattern to trim around. In case you're wondering about my batting, yes, it is black, and it's by Quilter's Dream, and it's a mid-loft poly batting. Because we are doing the Quilt As You Go method, I don't suggest going any higher than a mid-loft. Keep in mind that we're dealing with bias edges here and here. It's hard to stay stitch a quilt, and that's what seamstresses do. But we're going to spray starch the backing very heavily, and between that and the batting, that will help to keep the top from stretching out of shape. Now that we have everything cut out, it's time to layer our corner pieces. In the traditional way, we're going to have our backing face down, then our batting, and then our corner assembled piece on top of that. At this point, you will either spray or pin baste your layers together. But first, before we begin, so many people have trouble deciding what to quilt on their quilt. I follow the basic principles of Yin Yang when I quilt. The theory behind this is that opposite yet complementary energies attract. Balance and harmony is achieved, just like we strive for straight lines and curves in our quilting. Since we have so many straight lines in our piecing, we're going to concentrate on curves for our quilting. The first thing that we're going to do is stitch in a ditch around each of the stars, and I'll show you a diagram, and it'll be in your handout as well how to do that. I'm using, because everybody asked me, the Fine Line ruler by Accents and Design. It's a 6.5 inch straight edge. Makes this job go so much easier. For those of you who are new to rulers, you'll notice in the bottom right-hand block, the ruler is approximately 1/4 inch away from the star. This is the correct placement for stitching. We're stitching around these blocks in order to give the stars definition. In the center of the barber block, we'll stitch an X. In addition to all the points, you want to also outline the entire center section. That's shown in green in this drawing. Notice how the stitching goes completely around the orange sections of the Beth block. This helps to also make it more defined. Mary's block is different in that it has a square in the starburst. So we're going to also stitch around that square to give it more definition, as well as the center square. Please be aware that no matter how hard you try, you will have a little bit of backtracking in each one of these stars. But that's okay, I know you can do it. To avoid having to tie a lot of areas off going from one star to the other, since they don't really touch each other, let's go ahead and enter the fill stitch that we're going to use between the stars, which is the pebbles. And that's an easy way to get from one point to the other. Since we're stitching black on black, this might help you see it a little bit better. You can see how the pebbles are just in line going from one star to the next. And again, this prevents the need to have to tie off each time you start a new star. Before we proceed to the next section, which is going to be done with rulers and a curved ruler, I want to explain a few things about the curved rulers so that you totally understand what I'm talking about in the instructions. Once again, I am using the fine line ruler by Accents in Design, and your ruler may be a little different than this, but there should be a lot of similarities. First of all, if you notice on this ruler, the top arc and the bottom arc are the same. What this means is that I can use either side of this ruler and get the same results, which is helpful when you have to use a certain side of your foot to work on in a given area. As we're quilting, we're going to be quilting 1/4 of an inch away from certain areas, and we're also going to be stitching 3/4 of an inch away on the grid lines. Let me show you what line you will use to accomplish that. To stitch 1/4 of an inch away from a previous stitched line, you'll just place your edge of your ruler up against the stitched line. To stitch 3/4 of an inch away, you will use the second line in, and that will give you 3/4 of an inch. So whether you are using the concave or the convex side of the ruler, the markings are exactly the same, 1/4 inch on the edge and 3/4 of an inch, 2 lines in. And this is where the yin yang, or the harmony between straight and curved, takes place on our quilt. We have all those straight lines, and now with the use of our curved ruler, we're going to create arches around the stars. And let me explain to you how we're going to do that. Using the corners of each of the diagonal blocks, we're going to align our curved ruler so that the first line that we stitch goes into the corner, comes out of that corner and goes to the next corner. And we'll continue around the whole corner block in that manner until you get something that looks like this. To prevent you all from getting eye strain while you see me stitch black on black, I've gone ahead and drawn the mock corner up on a piece of white fabric, and that's what I'll be demoing on. A couple of things are important while you're stitching these arcs. If you look at the top left-hand corner, you'll see the correct placement of the curved ruler. Remember, your foot will add 1/4 inch to your stitching line. So if you want your stitching to fall right in the corner, make sure to make the allowance for that. In this next step, we're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the preceding lines that you stitched. We're going to take advantage that the foot adds 1/4 of an inch, and all we have to do this time is just place our ruler right on the stitches we've already done. The only other factor we have to keep in mind is when we approach the corners. You can see right here I'm stopping. I've stopped 1/4 of an inch, or I've just allowed my foot, which is 1/4 of an inch, to touch the other line. Now I can pivot and continue on with my stitching, knowing that I pivoted exactly at the 1/4 inch mark. For step 3, we're going to refer back to that marking that I had showed you earlier to give us a 3/4 of an inch stitch. We're going to place our ruler again on our previous stitches, which was a 1/4 of an inch away from our first stitch, and we're going to place that line indicated above on that line of stitching, and we'll continue doing that all the way through that section to give us that curved grid. Step 4, which is our final step for this grid work, will be to do the exact same thing that we've just done, but doing it in the opposite direction. We're still using the 3/4 inch mark on our ruler, and we're still aligning it on the previous row of stitching. And we will do that until we complete the entire segment. As you watch this being stitched out, there are a couple things that I'd like to point out to you. In the previous stitch out, you noticed how I had always used the ruler to go around the curve. That's not necessary. If you're good at backtracking, you can just stitch just like I did without the use of the ruler. However, if you don't feel comfortable with that, then by all means use the ruler to get to the next area you need to be. If you go too far, simply back up. You'll also notice on the raw edge where I'm going off into the seam allowance. You really don't want to go any further than that, because when you trim this off later, you don't want to have all these untied areas that may come undone. This brings us to the final portion of the quilting for your corner segments. We're going to fill in all the remaining areas with pebbling, which will help to puff up your stars, accentuate your grid work in the diagonals, and it definitely is going to contribute to adding curves to your lines for the yin yang. I truly believe that we have added balance and harmony to this segment of your quilt. As we finish up our fill stitches with the pebbles, you can see that it's just very relaxing. There's no rush. This is giving you another Zen feeling. You want to bring up your circles as close to your previous stitching line as possible, just like this. Again, there's absolutely no rush. Enjoy the process. It's almost like making a bunch of figure eights and they all interlock with each other, or you're making a snowball fort. Continue to make the circles until you can't make a full one. Then you can make a half one like I just did to fill in the area. The nice thing about circles also, since we're doing so much work on the bias, is you're not stitching in one particular direction or another. You're going totally around, which means that you're able to ease in a lot of things. I think this is one of my reasons for this fill being one of my preferred fills. It just makes your quilt lay down nice and flat because it's not stretching it in any direction. I hope you enjoy this, and I hope you take your time in filling this up, and I can't wait to see your results. And here is our final result of our Zen style quilting.